I'm Kat Dykman, and this is my presentation on Hardy-Weinberg principles and equations. First is important vocabulary. An allele is a variant of a gene that determines a trait. An allele is singular and represented as a single letter. A set of alleles is represented as two letters. A dominant allele is a variant that overpowers weaker alleles. Dominant genes will always be expressed if one or two alleles is present, and it's represented as a capital letter. A recessive allele is a weaker variant that is overpowered by dominant alleles. The trait that it codes for can't be expressed unless there is no dominant allele present. It must be two recessive alleles. It's represented as a lowercase. A set of alleles that is the same is called homozygous. Homozygous dominant means that it has two of the same dominant alleles. Homozygous recessive means that it has two recessive alleles. Heterozygous. Hetero means opposite or different. A heterozygous pair will have one of each, a dominant and a recessive. This is Hardy-Weinberg's equilibrium. This is the situation in which these equations are 100% accurate. This situation can't exist in real life. It assumes that there are no mutations in DNA, which is random and will always happen. It assumes that there's no random mating, which could only happen if mating was tampered with. This assumes no natural selection, which means that there would have to be no predators or disease present, an extremely large population size, and no gene flow, which could only occur if the population was quarantined. Our first equation is P plus Q equals 1. This is the equation for allele frequency to calculate the percentage of dominant and the percentage of recessive alleles in a population. P is the frequency of dominant alleles, and Q is the frequency of recessive alleles. Assume we have a population of 10 individuals. Each individual has a set of 2 alleles, which means there's 20 alleles total in the population. 6 of those alleles are dominant. We will find P and Q. The population has 20 alleles, and 6 of them are dominant, which means that 6 divided by 20 is 0.30 or 30%, which means that the dominant alleles is 0.30. And in P plus Q equals 1, in order to find Q, we just subtract P from 1. So 1 minus 0.30 is equal to 0.70, which means that Q is 0.70 or 30 and 70%. So 30% of alleles are dominant and 70% of alleles are recessive. Our second equation, P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared equals 1. This is the equation that calculates heterozygous pairs and homozygous dominant and homozygous recessive. P squared is the percentage of homozygous dominant individuals. Q squared is the percentage of homozygous recessive individuals, and 2PQ is the percentage of heterozygous individuals. For an example, in a population of 100, 60 people do not have freckles. Freckles are dominant, which means they're homozygous or heterozygous dominant. Only people with recessive alleles will not have freckles, or people who are homozygous recessive. We know that 60 and 100 people lack freckles, which means 60 people have homozygous recessive alleles. We will be finding P, Q, 2PQ, P squared, and Q squared. Of 100, we know that 60 are homozygous recessive, which means we know that Q squared is 0.60. With Q squared, we can find Q by finding the square root of 0.60, which is 0.77. It also goes down here in parentheses. Using the previous equation, P plus Q equals 1, we can find P by subtracting Q from 1. So 1 minus 0.77 is equal to 0.23, which makes P 0.23, which we will also put down here in parentheses. And then we can find p squared by squaring p. 0.23 squared is equal to 0.05. The only thing left to find is 2 PQ, which is written as it said, 2 PQ, or PQ twice, which is equal to 0.35. Which is correct. 0.05 plus 0.35 plus 0.60 equals 1. All of our correct answers written out. Q equals 0.77, Q squared is 0.60, P is 0.23, P squared is 0.05, 2PQ is 0.35, and our equation written out. In our population of 100, 77% have recessive alleles, 23% have dominant alleles, 5% are homozygous dominant, 60% are homozygous recessive, and 35% are heterozygous. For a second example, a large 500 individual group of Baikal seals is hauling out. Majority carry dominant homozygous and heterozygous alleles for large eyes. Only 80 have the recessive allele for small eyes. We'll do the same thing as the last equation. This is out of 500 individuals, and 80 are homozygous recessive, which means that we already know Q squared is 0.16, just by dividing 80 by 500. We can then find the square root of 16 to find Q, which is 0.40. Once again, P plus Q equals 1, so 1 minus Q, 0.40, equals 0.60, which makes P 0.60. And then to find P squared, we just square P, which is 0.36. Then to find 2PQ, we do this equation here. Correct that. And 2PQ comes out to be 0.48, which makes PQ, or P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared equals 1, 0.36 plus 0.48 plus 0.16 equals 1. And all of our answers written out neatly. Here's it written out in a long form. The dominant allele appears 60%. The recessive allele appears 40%. Homozygous dominant makes up 36% of the population. Homozygous recessive makes up 16% of the population. And heterozygous makes up 48% of the population, which means 84% of the population has large eyes and 16% of the population has small eyes. Next is the homework, which will be posted in the comments. A quick look at it. It has 3 questions that increase in complexity.